Hey everyone, so in this video I'm going to talk about running effective studio classes for adult piano students. And studio classes can be a really effective way to motivate, to promote a sense of community. It's a performance opportunity. It's also a chance for feedback. And typically they happen in conservatory or in specialized music schools and so on. And usually it's all the students of this or that esteemed professor that gather, right? That's like the teacher with the professor's studio, so to speak. It's not necessarily like a physical location, but it's like all of that person's students. They may gather and each one will perform. And it depends on the particular professor or studio, but sometimes the teacher will give comments and they may demonstrate, they may just give comments after each student's performance. My teachers were much more focused around peer comments as well. So basically we had to give really good comments in addition to hopefully performing very well as well too. You were heavily chastised if you didn't give good comments, if you just said like, hey, that was good, or that I thought, there's nothing I would improve upon there. Then you were kind of told like, okay, but you can't just say that. You have to give some kind of useful constructive critique, right? So it helps the student that you're giving the comments to because, of course, they have received some kind of comment to improve their playing. They've received another opinion and so on. But it's also helping you because your ability to teach, to give helpful critique, even for a piece you've never heard before, even to a student that's more advanced than you, even without the score in front of you, that really intimately relates to your ability to teach yourself, like your mastery of the material, your knowledge of music in general, your ability to listen in general. So in any case, like typically what I do in my studio classes, I've been inspired by my teachers' studio classes. I've added some of my own flavor, and I've done them for a few years now. My own private studio, after I stopped working in piano schools, it started around 4.5 years ago. I used to start off in person, and then I kind of transitioned to virtual, after the pandemic started, of course. So typically, in terms of actually running the class, everybody in this case gathers virtually. Of course, they could gather in person too if a teacher wants to do it that way. And in the beginning, typically I'll just greet people as they come in. Maybe I'm just like admitting people. And the reason I'm making this video is because I just finished teaching one like just now. And I thought it went pretty well. So I thought, why not just make a video on how to do that, right? The thing that I've just done just now. So I'm typically replying to whatever last minute text, email changes, or whatever it may be. It's always good to send reminders, as with any event. But it's just human nature, I think. Typically, you'll always have, one or two people cancel, one or two people arriving late, et cetera, or having to leave early. So I'm taking care of that, greeting people as they come in. Personally, I'm saying like, hey, you can turn off your cameras or mute or whatever if you want to warm up a little bit first. It's through Zoom, and I have both the computer. I'm using the computer to record the in speaker view, typically, in case anything good happens, we want to share that. And then the iPad I have on gallery view, and this is what I'm actually talking to the students through the iPad because I'm wanting to record speaker in case something good happens, and then here I'm able to see everybody as I'm talking to them. So usually lessons I have through the phone, but it's always best to be able to see everyone, acknowledge everyone, make sure everyone's taken care of, make sure also that I'm responding to any kind of irregularities that come in, like I was saying earlier. So I typically will start at about 5 minutes after the time just to give people a chance to come in. I tell people to arrive early. Most people don't, but at least you get more people arriving on time because you said for them to arrive early. So then I'll just start kind of going around. My default mode of operation, I guess, is to say, who wants to start? Sometimes there's a volunteer or two. Otherwise, I'll decide the order of at least a few students. And then for each student, they introduce themselves. I'll say like, oh, why don't you introduce yourself briefly. You can say anything personal, professional that you feel comfortable sharing, maybe how long you've been studying with me, where you're located, right? Because some people are in different parts of the country and so on. And then you can play your piece, and then we'll go on from there. I remind them to enable original sound because that's for best sound quality in Zoom. Maybe there's some other things with their devices. Then they go ahead and perform their piece. Then I'll ask them to give self-comments, typically. What did you think of your own performance? What did you feel could be improved? And that sort of thing. Then I'll call on one or two people. I guess today I tended to call on two people to give constructive critique to the original performer. What could they improve upon? What did they do well? Why do you think they did it well? If there's something that could be improved upon and it's just something like accuracy of notes, or that they just had memory slips, instead of merely saying this, how about making some suggestions in terms of how they could practice to improve? Or maybe there's musical suggestions, technical suggestions, performance-related suggestions, practicing, et cetera, et cetera. Let me just fix this thing that just came up. So, yeah. So all of these types of comments. It can be these. It can be other types of thoughts. If they thought that things went well, what was it that they liked? Like, we always want to try to be specific, right? So I'm trying to train people to be really effective teachers, because ultimately you're your own teacher every moment that you're away from me, of course, right? So I'm constantly like pushing people gently in terms of, well, what do you mean by that? Can you give an example? Can you give comments that don't merely sound as if they were prepared? In terms of, you could always say like, oh, you could work on the rhythm, you could work on the pedaling, but it's always good to qualify that with some examples as well, right? Such as in the beginning of the piece, such as in this part where you can kind of hum how it goes, or in this particular area in the right hand, right? So if you can qualify with examples, if you can be more specific, if you can give more targeted advice, that will help you to become a stronger teacher, which will help the student and will help yourself as well. Not just in this specific situation, of course, but in teaching yourself future pieces and everything as well. So I think, like, as this video is going on, I'm realizing I'm not really just talking about running an effective studio class, but in general, why I think learning to be a better teacher is so effective in your own learning as well. So anyway, so there will be some comments from peers, and then I will critique the critique like I was just doing, right? So I'll explain how can they make their comments better? How can they improve the commenting in general? And then I'll critique the student directly. I will, of course, personally make suggestions. And then typically I may lecture, demonstrate a little bit. So the way that I have things set up, usually I am sitting right here. That's recording. I'm talking to the students over here, and then I'll just literally like bring this up. This is actually plugged in. Let me unplug that for 1 second. I'll bring this along over here. I'll just set the iPad here. I'll make sure that I've enabled original sound, and then typically I'm of course demonstrating on the piano here, and I'll probably be talking to the students, so it's kind of set up on this little table here. I do like to use the iPad, like I said, because then I can continue to see all of the students. So that's the reason I've gone to the trouble of just setting up this little standing desk here. I can demonstrate, of course, and then after I've made my point, I typically will then just take this and go back to my original seating area, just because I find it more comfortable. I think a lot of teachers will kind of get like fixed in one spot, and it's really whatever works, as long as you can demonstrate, make your point and everything. I find that moving around is a very natural thing to do. And sometimes different things can happen. It's not always that things go exactly like that. Like, person introduces themselves, person plays, self-comments, comments from peers, critique on the comments from peers, critique personally from me, lecture, demonstration. Like, it could go that way, but For instance, today there were some students that didn't play, and I asked them to introduce themselves. Like, oh, these students aren't playing today, but why don't you at least uh, introduce yourself, say one or two interesting things. Let us know what you're working on. Do you have any questions for me or for any of the performers? And I think that's a really nice way to just make people feel comfortable, make them feel involved with the community and so on. Something new has been happening recently, actually, because I was totally on my own for some time. But, I have a few excellent teachers working for me now as well. And one of them is a dear friend of mine as well. And he was able to attend today. And so I also called on this teacher to make comments to some of the students. So that was really nice. And because he could only be here a certain time, I made the decision in the moment, let's have like 3 students perform back to back to back instead of all the commenting and stuff in between, so that this teacher can hear all of the students and then give some feedback, right? We can utilize his expertise before the students then leave. And there was another time when we were getting pretty deep into like intellectual discussion, like interpretational philosophy and so on. And we just kind of went with that. And, it seemed like we were off on an interesting train of thought. We were kind of creating some new ideas or ways of thinking together. So, that it seemed natural to let that expand for a little bit longer than normal. Somebody played like a piece that was relatively simpler compared to like some of like the super advanced pieces, but we were still able to go into like great detail, musicality, and so on. There was a student that happened to be a dancer that noticed interesting parallels between dancing and music, because apparently dancers also will frequently record themselves, correct, make minute adjustments, and then improve themselves that way. And that of course makes sense to me, but I'm around musicians so much and can't dance at all, really. So that's that was interesting to hear about that. And then there were some students that were guitarists as well too. There was a student that remarked to another student that it seemed like his left hand articulation was particularly good, perhaps as a function of being a guitarist, or so yeah, sometimes there would be commonalities that we would find. Sometimes there would be insightful observations. And for me, some of it is like the old school training of like performance to, of course, a very high level, and giving the best possible critique and surviving under performance pressure and all of these. This is a serious occasion. This is a serious performance critique opportunity. But a lot of it's also around building community for me, about letting adult students see that this is something unique that we have here. It's not just the adult student, it's really the serious adult student, not in the sense of like they must play like super high level pieces or they must practice 2 hours a day, but like, people that have a certain amount of dedication and passion for the piano, regardless of their careers or how much they're able to practice each week. And I just think that these events are just such a special way to bring the community together, to let students meet each other, have interesting discussions. So yeah, so I guess when I started recording the video, I thought in my mind like, oh, this is going to be more like just explaining some logistics, just the order of things. But organically in the moment, I really think one of the biggest components to running an effective studio class is having the correct mindset, right? All those things that I talked about in terms of genuinely wanting to create community, in terms of genuinely hearing each student, making them feel welcome, making them feel like a part of the culture of the studio, giving everyone a chance to be involved, not pushing people too much also if they're not ready to perform, for instance. That's really, it's how to run an effective studio, I guess, not even just how to run an effective studio class. But yeah, I think maybe that's just where we'll leave off. I have 4 of them a year typically, and this was the first one of the year, and I had a really nice time this time, as I do every time. I think the next one's going to be in May. So yeah, hopefully that was interesting, helpful. If you thought so, feel free to leave a comment with thoughts, any questions that you have that you'd like me to elaborate on. Like, subscribe, tell people about the channel if you find it interesting, and looking forward to the next video.